Hello, welcome to question number 17 of the revised GRE general test. So, this is a very interesting question. We've actually come to the section where we begin to answer questions based on graphical illustrations. Now, the very first thing, I'm going to teach you how to answer questions that come in this nature. Now, the very first thing you need to do when it comes to answering questions that has to do with graphical illustrations, or that comes with a graphical diagram, a graphical representation of some data or whatever it might be, the very first thing you want to do is identify the title. Now, looking at what we have here, this is the title of this diagram here. So what you do is you read the title and understand the title. Even if it takes you to read the title 2 times, it's worth the time. So I'm going to do that. The title says the variation in the amount of caffeine in common beverages and drugs. Now think about it. The variation in the amount of caffeine in common beverages and drugs. Within 5 seconds you should be done with this. So I know that the diagram I have here, or what I have here, is going to be talking about the variation in the amount of caffeine in some certain products. So the products we are considering is going to be common beverages and drugs. Now I now move to the diagram. That's step 2. So this is step 1. Now step 2 is to begin to study the diagrams. Now for the first row, it says the amount of caffeine in milligrams. So what I have here is 0 milligram, 25 milligram, 50 milligram, 75 milligram, up to 200 milligram. I go to the next row. So what I have here is coffee. Now the coffee here is, you have different kinds of coffee. Now the first is the decaffeinated coffee, the percolated, the deep brewed, and the instant coffee. So what I have here is, according to the diagram, says the variation in the amount of caffeine in each of this coffee. So an example, for the decaffeinated coffee, the variation in the amount of caffeine is between 0 and let's say 0 and probably here is around 10. So let's say the variation in the amount of caffeine in decaffeinated coffee is going to be, let's pull that out. So it's going to be between 0 and 10. So 0 and this should be 0 and 10 milligram. So similarly, for percolated coffee, the variation in the amount of caffeine lies between, so this is around 40 to 170. So that is from here, this is 40 to, so it corresponds to 170. So that'll be between 40 and 170 milligram. So the variation here means that sometimes you might have between 40, you can have 50, 60, but it can't go lower than 40 and it can't go beyond 170 milligram. So similarly, for the deep brewed coffee, the variation lies between, you can see here is around 60 to say 180. Similarly, instant coffee, you have between 30 and 110. So you can see I'm beginning to understand the diagram. That's the second step, to understand the diagram. So I go to the next one. Next one talks about, so this one is about the coffee, the variation in the caffeine, amount of caffeine in different brands of coffee. Now the next one is beverages, brewed tea. So this is the variation. Instant tea, this is the variation. Cocoa, this is the variation. You can see cocoa lies between 5 and 20. So you can see that, just projecting that up, you can see the variation. So this is around 5 and this is around 20. So similarly, you go to drugs. So the variation in the amount of caffeine, this is quite alarming. See the weight loss drugs, diuretics, and stimulants. See the amount of caffeine you have there. Between 100, you can see between 100 and 200. that's quite alarming, man. So that's between 100 and 200. Now that's something that should interest you, and that's why when you come across questions of this nature, it should interest you, because it's always very interesting. So you can see also pain relievers. Pain relievers lies between, so this is from here to here. So here corresponds to 100, while here corresponds to around 30. That's pain relievers, and then cold, and then all along. So now I already know what the diagram is talking about, and the source is Food and Drug Administration, so it means it's a reliable source. So it's not as if you're reading something fake. And then lastly, it says the information that we have here is based on 5 ounce cups of coffee. So this is the sample. The sample was gotten from 5 ounce cups of coffee, tea, and cocoa. 5 ounces of coffee, tea, and cocoa. So from here to here, so what they used was 5 ounces, and then for the other one, 12 ounce cups of soft drinks. So this is for the soft drinks, they used 12 ounces, and then for the drugs, just a single dose. Maybe a single dose might be 3 tablets, might be 4 tablets, might be 5 tablets, but a single dose, that was where they derived this. So this was gotten from a single dose, that is one dose. Now, all you're doing here shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes, or maximum of 4 minutes, just to understand the diagram. Just be at rest, understand the whole thing, because it's always very interesting when it comes across, when you come to answering questions that are kind of that have graphical illustrations. Alright, now we understand the diagram. Let's now go to answer the first question. It says question 17 to 20 are based on this following data. So let me go to question number 17. So question 17 says the least amount of caffeine in a 5 ounce cup of drip brewed coffee exceeds the greatest amount of caffeine in a 5 ounce cup of cocoa by approximately how many milligrams? So I need to know the least amount of caffeine. So the least amount, the least amount of caffeine, I need to know that. The least amount of caffeine in the drip brewed coffee. So the least amount of caffeine in the drip brewed coffee. And then I need to know that. So similarly, I need to know the greatest amount of caffeine. The greatest amount of caffeine in cocoa. That is in cocoa. So when I know this and I know this, so I want to know the gap between the two of them. So that will help me in answering this question here. So let's go back to what we have here. So what we have here is the least amount of caffeine for drip brewed coffee. Now this is for drip brewed coffee here. Drip brewed coffee, and the least amount, so this is drip brewed coffee. The least amount of caffeine here corresponds to, you can see here, it corresponds to 60. So here is going to be 60, while the greatest amount of cocoa, so where is cocoa? So this is cocoa. The greatest amount of cocoa, this is the greatest amount here, it corresponds to 20. So this is 25, so it should be around 20, so it corresponds to 20. So the gap, that is the least amount, exceeds the greatest amount by 60 minus 20, and that's going to give you 40. So the solution to that problem should be 40, and then that completes the problem. So let's go to the next video and answer question number 18.